On to the first business item. Business item number 6, consideration of resolution number 636, repealing resolution number 623. Mr. Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. I don't have a whole lot to add. I certainly can answer the questions to the extent that I have any answers for them. Obviously, there's a lot unknown at this point. So the item you have before you this evening, it does not require action from council. It is completely optional at this point. I laid that out in the staff report. There's several courses of action at this point. One of them is council because, again, as laid out in the staff report, the city has been informed that Molbak at this point is not going to be in phase 1 of that project. That would make that development agreement, which stipulates that it will be in phase 1, effectively null and void. Council has the ability to nullify that DA by rescinding the resolution that approved that DA. Alternatively, again, as I lay out the staff report, council certainly can wait to see what happens. I think there's probably some pros and cons to both courses of action here. But it is, I think, as we've seen very much, and as we've seen from Molbak's reported even today, very much a developing story at this point. But of course, wanted to lay out potential courses of action for council. They can rescind that this evening if they want. Can also wait to see, kind of give this a little bit of time to see what happens. I think as the mayor and as we've heard this evening suggested, see what happens between now and some point in the future, and then we can take action at that point.
Any questions, comments? Councilmember Taylor.
Yeah, I agree with that suggestion of waiting. Within the city, we have a lot of contracts, and we have a lot of contracts that are going into arbitration and disagreement and various phases, and we just found out about this. And I think for the city to be engaged in contract review, jumping in for any contract is pretty capricious. And yeah, I don't think we want to be engaged in going into private contracts right away. So.
Yeah, and certainly council should determine what it wants to do there. But on that point right there, it's not a private contract that we're talking about, right? This is a development agreement between the city and Green Partners, which is a contract that the city is obviously a party to.
But, okay, but you did stipulate that if the Molbak's project isn't begun within phase 1, that would be in violation of what we already have with
Correct.
The city. So.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right, and that's the point, right? There's no action is necessary this evening. We have been informed that it's not part of phase 1, but of course things, and obviously they can change, right? So, and I think that's the hope of Molbak's and everybody at this point, right? So I don't disagree that there's probably some wisdom in waiting to see and giving them the opportunity, but I think there's also some wisdom in even just having this conversation this evening that the council, much like I think the community, is not happy about this development and is looking for some resolution.
Also, are we taking any position of getting in the middle of this or reviewing contracts? And
I think Mr. Gansett can speak to it, but as I mentioned, it is a contract that the city is one of the two parties to. So we have every ability at this point to take an action if council so deemed necessary. I'm not recommending that per se, but it has the ability to do so. Okay, so there is the issue, the contract issue, obviously that we've heard about in the media today between Green Partners and Molbak's. We are not a party to that.
Thank you.
We are a party to the contract between the city and Green Partners, which is the development agreement. That's a legal contract. That's the one that we're talking about. We would have ability to take action on, not the contract between Molbak's and Green Partners. They're two different contracts, right?
Right. And we're nowhere near approaching breaking a contract with the city.
We are not.
Yeah.
We've been informed that the other party does not intend to hold up their part of the contract. And that's where we get to say, okay, at this point, do we want to continue with this contract or not? That's the question before council this evening.
Okay.
Councilmember Best-Campbell.
So I think it's important that the two parties, Molbak's and Green Partners, work out their differences separate from us. I think that giving them time, I don't know if I want to put a time limit on it per se. I mean, between November and December, there's a lot of things. I don't know if they can hammer out their issues between now and then, but I think giving them time to work through their issues is judicious and important because it's a disagreement that they have. The city has already said what we are for. It's been presented to those parties. But I just have to say that this is a very visceral conversation because when you think about Woodinville, Molbak's is Woodinville. Where do you live? I live in Woodinville. Well, I don't know where that is. Sure you do. It's where Molbak's is. So this is an incredibly hot issue for people. It's been here longer than most of us have been around. And I think time would be important for these parties to come to whatever agreement they need to come to. So I think that as much time as they need, development agreements are, is this a 10-year agreement? I don't see the rush in forcing them to the table. I think if they need time to mend relationships and fences, I'm fine with that. But, losing Molbak's would be losing the heart of what Woodinville is. And I want to encourage them to take as much time as necessary to keep really the most beloved business in Woodinville here. So I don't think we should cancel this contract at all, but I do want to strongly encourage them to actually pick up the phone and communicate. There seems to have been a communication breakdown for reasons that we aren't privy to. So I would just love to see them work it out and figure out what it is that they're disagreeing on, hone in on it, and see if they can find a solution. But I think we need to give them the space to do what they need to do with the understanding that Molbak's is Molbak's, and Molbak's is Woodinville, and Woodinville is Molbak's. And if they go forward with that understanding, I think that they might be able to come to a resolution.
Councilmember Rubstello.
Thank you. I think we should, even if it's an advisory vote, do some kind of action that shows that the council's 100% behind the developer agreement as written, so that Green Partners is very clear that if they go this way, the developer agreement's going to have to be renegotiated. There's no need, I agree with everyone, there's no need to break it right now, but I think we should find a way to send a very clear message as a united council.
Councilmember Evans.
So I just want to be clear here, because I know I've had a lot of people reach out to me today. I know there's a lot of speculation and conversation on social media. So if we could just get either Mr. Ganson or Mr. Buchanan on the record, can Green Partners move forward and totally cut Molbak's out as our agreement with, or our DA with them stands right now?
Jeff, do you want to?
I can address that. Sure. Yeah, you bet. First of all, just for clarity, the council, through the prior resolution 623, authorized the development agreement, but it hasn't been fully executed. So it's a nullity today. It doesn't exist. But as authorized by council, it's certainly my view that Molbak's being in phase one is an integral part of that development agreement. I think every council member would agree that that aspect was critical to authorization of the development agreement in the first place. In essence, as I understand it, Green Partners has indicated an intention to do something different than what is reflected in the substance of the development agreement. So at this point, as I said, in my view, it's essentially a nullity. Repealing Resolution 623 would sort of clean that up and just make very clear that that development agreement doesn't exist and won't. And if there is a future development agreement, it will presumably look different. But as you've been advised by staff and the city manager, there's no need to, there's not a critical need to repeal that resolution because again, Green Partners is indicating pretty clearly an intention, at least right now, not to build the project that's indicated in the development agreement. So if that changed through negotiation among those parties to where Green Partners felt that they could once again embrace the development agreement the council has authorized, it could be executed and be performed.
Thank you. So with that, what I'm hearing, just in layman's terms, not lawyer terms, is we have an agreement, and that agreement currently has Molbak's in phase 1, and we currently have strong language that says Molbak's is an integral part of this project. So I think that we should keep that, and if Green Partners can come to an agreement with Molbak's, that would be great, and then we have this agreement ready to go. But if Green Partners comes back to us and says we can't do it and we need all these amendments, I think that's at the time where we really take some strong action and probably just decline any of the amendments that they come to us with, because this is the agreement and this is what we can stand behind now. Thank you.
Councilmember Arndt.
I will just echo the comments of my fellow council members. I don't feel that we need to take action tonight, but I think giving the parties some time to come to an agreement on their own is the best course of action. The original development agreement that we as a city agreed to with Green Partners is the vision that we would like to see here in the city, with Molbak's at the heart of this new development. And I think it's important to emphasize that is what we agreed to, and that is what we are looking for. And while they have time to negotiate, that was ultimately what we had agreed to as a council. So I think giving them a little bit of space to work it out, with the knowledge that at the end of it, we know what we are looking for in the city and what we will accept for the city.
Deputy Mayor Randall.
I'm going to echo everybody else, just to go on record. I think this is a good example of why we do have developer agreements, to put things in place that says you get an advantage for doing things that are within this agreement, and if things shift away from that vision, then we have an option to actually remove some of the advantages that you get from that developer agreement. And that seems like what everybody's talking about. One of the things that I would ask the city manager is, I'm thinking that we want to get beyond 2004 because the holidays are coming. There's not enough time for any level of discussion to take place. And we want to make sure that we're beyond the first couple of meetings where we have to do our own due diligence with new elections and new officers. Would the best time to think about this be end of January, beginning of February, 1st of March? Could you give some guidance?
Certainly. So if council is looking for kind of what I'm hearing, right, is have this discussion, but table any action till either some uncertain date in the future or some certain date. And if you're looking to assign, kind of at least a time threshold to this, I guess the best piece that I would probably defer back to is just extensive experience at this point negotiating DAs and these types of deals. And you're exactly right, they don't happen in a course of weeks. I think these parties have been having these conversations, obviously kind of non-successfully at this point. So I don't think it's picking up cold at this point, but at the same time, it's not going to happen fast. And we know a DA from scratch takes a year at fastest. We're not starting from that point with this one. I think they have I don't know what they are, but obviously they have specific sticking points in their conversations they need to work through. And private parties will work faster than when we're dealing with all the processes that a government entity has to go through for those types of things. So I don't think a year is probably what it would take, but it's not going to be a month either.
Fuzzy enough.
That's a big gap, I understand, but We've done DAs in 6 months. We've done them in 3 years. So it depends on all kinds of different variables.
I was really thinking to Councilmember Rubstello's thought that could we put a stake in the ground and say when we revisit this? But I think probably the best course of action is follow along with everybody on council. We do want to revisit this if we don't see any traction based on the existing developer agreement. And we do want to see the existing developer agreement move forward.
So one piece I should add, that one kind of time-sensitive piece, and I think there's a workaround in talking with Green Partners in the last 24 hours, that is somewhat time-sensitive from the city's perspective, is some of the infrastructure pieces, and that's specific to the Widener development at Wooden Creek Village, which is on the cusp of permits for phase 4 and 5, which includes their obligation to build 138th south of and a portion of 173rd, and the roundabout at 171st and 138th. That infrastructure depends on, at least as envisioned today, participation from Green Partners in the form of property contributions and under the currently approved DA, but unexecuted DA, monetary contributions to that infrastructure as well. So there's that piece of, we're going to need to figure out those roads at some point, and under our development agreement with Widener, the city is, and this goes back 10 years now, is actually obligated to acquire some of the property on the south side of 171st from 2 different private property owners there, which obviously takes time to acquire property as a governmental entity. So there's kind of, it's not a hard and fast, but we do have that piece that's going to at some point become urgent.
Okay. We'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Councilmember Best-Campbell.
Can you periodically ping the parties and say, how's it going? Have you guys met for coffee lately? And sort of, in your own way, strongly encourage them through the friendliest means possible to get together and talk. I mean, certainly not get in the middle of it, but just say that your council is itching for an update. And, as usual, you feel free to throw us under the bus as your employers, that we are asking for updates. But I think if we have some sort of pressure upon both Molbak's and Green Partners to come to a solution, because you keep pinging and poking and coming back to us and saying, I haven't received an update yet, but I'll check next time. Maybe that's the external pressure that they might need, because you'll hear us talking about it in the meetings once every few months. I just think that a little bit of positive pressure from the right direction might be a good thing, if you feel comfortable throwing us under the bus.
Yeah, and I think to that end, one of my previous comments, and I've heard it from council this evening, right, is there's value in just having this conversation, right, that not just the community hears that obviously we share their concerns about this, but also that Green Partners and Molbak's hear that our goal is to figure this out, and we're going to keep encouraging them along those lines.
So you mentioned like one of the problematic issues of having it take too long is the infrastructure. Is there any other? My experience in negotiating contracts has always been a deadline fosters resolution, and having this go out into perpetuity, I don't think fosters resolution. So that's why I was saying first quarter, and we could certainly extend that if it seems like they're making progress or something like that. But deadlines always make deals, in my opinion. Is there any danger that we're not aware of to what our vision is, or the development, or the city, or whatever, in just letting it hang out there for too long?
I think the one that came to mind the quickest, obviously, was that infrastructure piece, and it's knowing that we're imminently going to be issuing the permits for phase 4 and 5 of Widener. Land acquisition, even when it goes smoothly, is a year-long process for a governmental entity when we've got to jump through all the different hoops that we're required to. Knowing if we're issuing permits, construction is probably a 2 to 3 year window. We've got to get started sooner than later on that property acquisition, and that's got to be done well before we do obviously the construction, which itself will take at least a year on that infrastructure. So we're not quite emergency point yet, but it's not one that can hang out there for a year to two before we get some resolution on what those roads look like.
Have you had any indication in any talks of how long they've been at odds? I mean, this, to us, it seemed like it happened just suddenly, but it seems like that this has been percolating for a while. Is there any, just to get a sense of, okay, it's been going on for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, how much longer do we let it go on for a year? Because it's already been, do you have any sense of that?
I think Green Partners, I think they have been dealing with the same things that a lot of people in the development and construction industry have been dealing with in the last 3 years, frankly, of prices are soaring. They've got to reevaluate numbers across the board. And I think this is that to a large extent, that everything is more expensive than it was 3 years ago when this project kind of kicked off. But as far as timeline, when I couldn't say. I haven't been a part of those conversations.
Has there been any, so the holdup appears to be either Molbak's not being in the project or not being in the first phase. Has there been any indication of a possibility of it being in another phase and still remaining in the project, but just in a different timeline?
I think they are exploring that opportunity. I think it's going to take a little bit of time, and I don't know that there's not consensus on what an acceptable alternative would be at this point.
And when I was thinking about this, I haven't been at this as long as some, but I don't remember a development agreement naming a tenant, a business in a development agreement, because we have this, and I think it's wise of this council to actually have put that in the development agreement for just this reason. Molbak's is spelled out in the development agreement as being important. Is that common? Has that ever been done before? I don't remember seeing it.
In my experience, and I think the staff team that worked on this, it is unusual that we were specific to that degree. But I think that speaks very loudly about our goals with this development, that Molbak's needs to be part of that project.
I would agree. I think council feels that this was important enough to be included as a public benefit in this agreement, and I agree with the council that I think we want to see that continue. So, any other discussion, comments? Do I have a motion? Deputy Mayor Randolph.
Just one last very important comment, that one of our big concerns when taking on this development and getting this developer agreement through was the number of small local businesses that we would be excising from that location. And now the last small business is there's an attempt to exclude it from the project. To me, that's of great concern. And I feel like I'd be remiss not to bring that up.
Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none. Thank you.